You're listening to Making a Living Show. I'm Roby Levy.
Hey, my name is Ken Tizzard, and I make music for a living.
You might know Ken Tizzard as the bassist for multi-gold and platinum-selling bands, the Watchmen and Thorrnley. But he's also a singer-songwriter with 8 critically acclaimed records and an intimate weekly online show called Whiskey Wednesdays. Ken recently released All Together Now, an album of reimagined covers featuring members of Lowest of the Low, Headstones, Headley, and the Watchmen. Here's my chat with Ken Tizzard. Who are you, and what do you make for a living?
My name is Ken Tizzard. I'm from St. John's, Newfoundland, and I make music, essentially.
So, essentially, how did you get started making music?
I started playing music in school. Started playing punk rock with some friends of mine. When I discovered punk rock back home in Newfoundland, I was about 13, and I was a bit of a displaced kid, growing up amongst the preppies and the jocks and the cool people and the rockers, and I didn't really fit in anywhere. And I found this group of people in downtown St. John's. There was a little skateboard punk rock scene, and I loved the music, and I was already skateboarding, so that became a thing. And then I started playing in punk bands. It was about sort of skateboarding and playing music for a big chunk of years. And I think that the DIY model of the punk rock thing, and growing up in Newfoundland where I was not alienated, that's the wrong word. Growing up in Newfoundland in the 60s and 70s, there wasn't a lot of outside world influence. So like even growing up, there was a bunch of us bands. There was 4 or 5 bands, and we would play all year and then pool our money and then like fly in like SNFU or DOA or Deja Voodoo, one of these bands. And we'd just pool all resources to create a scene. And that stuck with me forever. And when I moved to Toronto, I just continued on that path. And then, that led me into the corporate world of music with making records for EMI and Universal MCA, 604, Roadrunner. Those albums that I made were great, and I had a really good time doing that. And towards the end of it, when I was with Thornley and I was kind of phasing out of that, and the record, with the Watchman and stuff too, we'd had issues where the record company was coming in and getting more into wanting to be more control of the art. Finally, after, a long time of dealing with that, I just kind of went, I'm going to just go do my own thing. And that was when I had to recreate again, in my 30s and 40s to find out what it was I was doing. And I'm still building on that. But I think a lot of the DIY model that I learned in the St. John's hardcore punk scene, even though I play folk music primarily, that stuff stuck with me, and it's still part of what I do today as a model for life. I get up, I create, and then I find ways to turn what I've created into food. Essentially.
Right. Food and shelter. Nice.
Yeah.
So taking me all the way back though, so you were playing in punk bands, and then you said you made the move to Toronto. What made you make a move to Toronto?
I was 18 years old, just turning 19, and I had played with everybody in Newfoundland that was a band. I'd been around the scene, and I had just met with Jody Mitchell was down. He used to work for EMI Records, and he was in Newfoundland as part of the COCA conference, maybe in 88, somewhere around there, maybe 87. And I caught him in an elevator and gave him my, hey, I'm a musician, I'm a bass player, I want to make music, what do I have to do? And he looked at me and he just said, get off of this bloody rock and get up to Toronto. And I kind of thought, no, I want to do it from back here. And that summer, a lot of my friends moved to Toronto. And I remember getting a call from Mike Monroe, and he said, Ken, there's so much work up here. He said, you can come up, you can get a job in the morning and quit at lunchtime and have another job by 2:00. He said, and we were teenagers, so like telemarketing was
right,
the jobs we were looking for. We weren't looking for careers. And I said, Mike, I don't even have the money to come up. I said, I can hardly pay my rent. And he called me later that night and he said, there's a flight leaving Newfoundland tomorrow at 4 up to Toronto. I bought you a seat on it. Come on up and you can stay with me. And that was what I did. I went up to Toronto. I had $60 in my pocket. I had my bass guitar with one change of clothes in the case, and that was it. And I came up and I hunkered down and I started doing all these telemarketing jobs to pay my rent while I played with every band on Queen Street. And I did that for years before I eventually sort of, hooked up with the Watchman and we got signed. And, then things took a different path for me. But,
well, and so how did you hook up with the Watchman? Who was doing what at what time?
So I was playing with a band called Growl. And we were a Toronto folk rock band, for lack of a better title. It was me and Mark and Peter Kesper, the Kesper brothers, and Tony Evans. And we had landed a tour of Russia back in 1991. It was a 6-week tour. And the day that we landed, if you look through the history books, there was a time back in the early 90s in Russia where parliament was dissolved and there was kind of 2 governments and 2 police and 2 militaries all existing at the same time. And the kind of peak of it was when they bombed the White House in Moscow. The day they bombed the White House was the day that we arrived. So we arrived in Russia from Newfoundland as young kids. We arrived with our translator to hear that like everything was shut down, and the police on the streets were. It was just insane. But we did this wonderful 6-week tour of Russia, and I say wonderful in hindsight because it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. However, living through it was one of the hardest experiences. Anyways, we came back and City TV had offered us to play. They had the bands on in the morning for breakfast television. So we did that. And my day job at the time was working as photo editor for Music Express magazine. And we shared office space with Jake Gold, who had the Tragically Hip and this brand new band called the Watchman. And he saw me on TV that morning, and I was, afterwards I was in the coffee room making a coffee, and Jake came in. He said, "I didn't know you were a bass player." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I thought you were a photographer." I said, "No." I said, "I do, this is what I do for my job, but I want to be a musician." And then he said, "Well, I've got this new band from Winnipeg, the Watchmen." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I remember them. They had played at the Music Express Christmas party a few months before, or the year before." I said, "Yeah, I remember them." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, they're looking for a bass player and they're in Winnipeg." And I said, "No fucking way. I'm not moving to Winnipeg. I'm just getting settled into Toronto after leaving from Newfoundland. I'm not going to move to Winnipeg." And he said, "Well, let me fly you out and you can meet the guys." And that kind of started it. My only rule, I flew out the following weekend and met them and got the gig. And the only rule I had was, I wanted to stay in Toronto. I didn't want to move to Winnipeg. And from Toronto, I could correspond back and forth. So that was how that all happened. It was Jake Gold seeing me and just happened to be sharing a building with him, So it was kind of right time, right place.
And you guys stayed with him throughout much of the Watchman's existence,
We stayed
right?
with Jake. Jake was our manager forever. I mean, I still talk to Jake regularly. He doesn't manage the band anymore, but well, we're not really a band anymore. Jake managed us until the band ended. When I started Thornley, it wasn't even called Thornley. When me and Ian and Sekou decided to start a new band, Sekou was leaving Edwin, Ian was going to leave Big Rec, and I'd leave the Watchman. That was in 2001, I think. And that was when we all parted ways. And I even had to part ways with Jake at the time because Ian had a different manager, and it used to be Jake's partner, and they had split, and Jake and Bernie Breen had split. They had a really bad split, and they were kind of adversaries. Jake was managing the Watchman and the Hip, and Bernie had Big Rec, and then the Hip ended off going over to Bernie too. So there was all this animosity. And then I was playing with Ian all of a sudden, and Bernie was like, "Sorry, you can't have Jake as your manager." I'm like, "Well, he's my manager." And it's like, "Well, not for this band." And Jake is like, "Well, I manage you, Ken, so I manage the band." And it was this real weird time, and I just kind of went, I don't know what to do here. And the record company, kind of stepped in, and they had been working with Bernie, and that was where it was going. So, I had to split ways with Jake then too. But I've always liked Jake Gold. He's been people know him as a bulldog and he's a bit of a hard-ass businessman, but he's really the guy that you want on your side. He did amazing things for the Watchmen and the Hip, and he has the Hip back again now. He's the one, who's currently managing their career and helping them put out the records and all that. So I got nothing but respect for Jake. There was lots of years of great things that came from working with him.
And so once you guys were firmly figured out in terms of management, in terms of where you're going, but how long were you with Thornley for? You're still playing with Thornley when they play, right?
Thornley started, there was me and Ian and Sekou, and then we had, I think, 2 or 3 guitarists before Tavis came in. Thornley started as a collaboration between me and Ian and Sekou. Like Ian at that point was dating and getting married to my sister.
Oh, okay.
So Big Rec and the Watchmen had done a big tour across Canada, a big arena tour. And Ian met my sister at the Toronto show, at the last show, and they became, they fell in love. And anyways, they were getting married and having kids and doing all that. So I was spending a lot of time with Ian, and it seemed natural. I was writing stuff, Ian was writing stuff, and it just kind of turned into that. So we worked organically for the better part of a year to get the songs on that first Thornley record together, demoing them and shopping them, and working on arrangements, eating food and getting drunk and doing all that shit. And we did that for a year, and then Ian changed management, and his new manager came in and said, this is Ian's show. You guys can leave if you want to, or if you want to stay, everything that you've been talking about for the last year is essentially gone. This is Ian's show, and that's your choice. And I kind of went, well, I got a year invested into it. So I stayed with it. And I was hoping to stay longer than it would, but unfortunately, that pattern of, for lack of a better word, pattern of neglect towards the people in the camp inevitably led me to, I sat down with Ian, and I remember it was in September, and I said, listen, there's two things that you need to change. And this was 5 years after we'd been touring, and the records were out and things were going really well. Mm-hmm. And I just said to Ian, I said, if I want to continue with this, but if I'm going to continue, there's two things that need to change, and I won't say what they are. But I said, I'll give you a month to kind of think about it and make some plans. And a month later, almost to the day, he called me and Sekou and said, I heard what you guys said, and I'd rather get a new bass player and drummer than make those changes. And I said, well, those two things, if you can't live without these two things that I feel are destroying everything, then I should be going too. So, I get asked a lot, who got fired and who left? I don't fucking know. I said, I want this to change, and I can't continue unless it does. And this person said, well, I can't make that change. So we all just kind of went, okay, well, it's over then. And then Ian continued along. After that, there was a bunch of ugly legal stuff with management and myself that I never thought that I'd end up getting into. And me and Ian didn't speak for a few years after that, even though he was married to my sister. There was a lot of continuation of the behavior that had been happening, and it didn't make for a nice parting. After that, Ian kind of slowly worked his way back into my life. And then at that point, he'd changed the name back to Big Rec, and he was still having a hard time finding a bass player a couple years later. He'd been through 2 or 3, so he had these tours coming up that he needed help with. So he asked me, and I said, sure. And I went back and I played, I don't know, I guess I did maybe another 8 or 10 tours with Big Rec at that point. But again, I was like, Ian, this isn't Big Rec. Like, I'm not part of Big Rec. This is Dave Henning's gig. I'm not sure what, nothing ever felt right after that. So, inevitably it got to the point where I just said, Ian, I can't do this. You need to find a band. You need to get your shit together. I'm not coming back. I'm not being the new Big Rec bass player. It's time for you to kind of lay your feet down and get stuff done. And that's kind of where that was left. The Big Rec Thornley thing just kind of disappeared out of my wheelhouse, and I'm fine with that. It's nice. I'm very proud of that first Thornley record, especially. I'm very proud of. I think we did amazing things. I think we had an amazing sound. I think we kind of took the world by storm too. I mean, we really did. The amount of stuff that happened in the U.S. and abroad was incredible. Unfortunately, the business of the music business was. I don't know how many times Ian said to me, Ken, it's nothing personal. This is just business. And I just looked at him and said, whenever you say that, that's your way of justifying the fact that you're fucking me, and it's just business. I'm like, no, it's not business. You can make a decision. The business isn't ruling your life. And those were the type of arguments and stuff that we always had. And that's where that one, will I ever go back and play with Ian again? I won't. I won't go back into that camp again. I love Ian. He's got a big part in my heart, and I love the music that we made. And I will never, ever forget the feelings of standing on stage with him and Sekou. And, like I said, I think I went through 9 or 10 guitar players while I was with him. But with him and Sekou and me, the power that we had and the in-tuneness that we had with each other musically, that was unparalleled and unfound in anybody else. It was an amazing experience. I would never talk badly of that in any way, shape, or form. But the logistics of making it work just didn't work out for me.
The chemistry involved in making something really great is also usually just volatile enough, or just bubbling below the surface at all times, that it's always in danger of exploding.
Absolutely,
it's just the nature of making something good is just teetering on making something that's going to fall apart.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened. Like the year that me and Ian and Sekou worked together before the management came in and stuff, we were working collectively, and everything was like, this is an equal partnership. You know, whenever we get the record out, whenever merch comes, this is all going to be equal. And I think that very first step of, you know, it was the first day that we started recording, and the new management came in, and they actually sat down with me and said, we have other bass players ready to fill your shoes. You can either take our offer or not. And I said, there's no offer. I've been working on this for a year. My offer's with Ian. And that was the first time Ian looked at me and said, it's just business, Ken. I don't even know. And I said, what do you mean you don't know? You're taking everything? And he said, that's what the business guys are telling me I have to do. And I went, this isn't what we just spent a year doing. And that was the beginning of the end, you know, because it immediately put everybody into a box. And that, I mean, yeah, those few years touring on that first Thornley record, as great as they were, man, there were more broken windows and broken mirrors and chairs flying around the bus and fists, like literally fist fighting amongst the band members on the bus, just because it was such an uncomfortable and it was such a damaging environment. But we made an amazing, like those, when we were on stage, it was incredible. And that's what kept us going. And that's why I say when record companies started coming in, and even when I remember the day that I told Ian those two things that I needed was the day that he played me a song. It was a Sunday. I showed up at my sister's house, and Ian said, come down. I wrote something last night. I went down. He played it for me, and I went, this is fucking amazing. I said, Ian, this is the type of stuff we have to do. It had a little bit of Dire Straits in it, a little bit of Fleetwood Mac, a little bit of Soundgarden. Like, it had all this great stuff. And Ian looked at me. He said, nobody will ever hear this. And I said, why? He said, there's no money in a song like this. And I started to cry. I said, Ian, this is one of the most beautiful songs you played me in 6 months. And you're telling me you're not even going to like let us consider it as a song. He said, this song, there's no money in this. And it was later that afternoon that I said, okay, we've got to make some changes. But that kind of broke my heart that day, that he played me such an amazing song and then made it very clear to me that it wasn't going to be heard because of the business that we were in. And it just made me sick, you know.
From that point, I mean, once you guys went your different ways, you began a different journey. You began looking for something else, creating something else. I mean, what happened next in your musical evolution?
Well, there was a period of floundering. I mean, the last year that I was on the Thornley tour bus, I spent most of my nights after the shows in the back lounge, smoking weed and listening to Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan and Nick Drake and all this stuff that I'd been listening to since I was a kid. And the front lounge would be, reggae party, just with all the strippers and all that stuff. Lots of fun, great, not knocking it, but it wasn't really my scene. And that last year, I kind of knew that what I was doing with Thornley wasn't where I wanted to be. Even though I was enjoying it and it was satisfying on so many levels, it wasn't where I wanted to be. And when the head finally broke, I kind of went, okay, so where do I want to be? And I thought the best way to explore that was to get an acoustic guitar, rework some songs that I had written, some Watchman tunes, some of my favorite songs, like Nick Drake's and the Bob Dylans, and go out and start playing coffee shops. And I literally went from, playing Hershey Park with opening up for Nickelback and Three Doors Down for like 50,000 people, to finishing that and then taking 4 months off and then playing in a coffee shop for 6 people and realizing, what the fuck have I done? And everybody in my world said to me, Ken, the term they used was career suicide. They said, for you to be leaving Thornley at this point, turning your back on 20 years of rock and roll to go play acoustic guitar, is career suicide. But I knew I needed to do it. My kids were growing up. I was still away from them way too much. The Thornley camp brought nothing, didn't bring much joy to my life outside of the time we were on stage. The demands of the touring were too much for what I was getting out of it. And I knew I just had to change. So I just kept pushing it. I kept writing new songs. I made a 6-string bass singer-songwriter album, which was borderline ridiculous, but it did. A year after putting that album out, I found myself on stage with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra backing me up.
Right.
It caught the eyes of some great people and put me into a great new atmosphere. And then I continued down the road of country, folk, Americana, and I kind of found a niche, which I refer to as narrative songwriting. People like Slade Cleaves and Ron Hines. Bob Dylan does it a little bit. Tom Petty does it a little bit. Chris Christopherson does it quite well. these are songs that, every line gives you an image or a character trait or a timestamp, or, you listen to a 5-minute song and it's like reading a short story. There's no catchy choruses that, you can sing along that happen in 15 seconds. It was a totally different thing for me. And it was funny because I was still doing Watchmen shows and still doing the odd big rec show, and then trying to, take like Watchmen tunes on the acoustic guitar and trying to turn them into this narrative thing. And I'm like, it wasn't working. And I'm learning Watchmen tunes on the guitar. And I'm like, this seems stupid to be playing on an acoustic guitar. Like there's no power, singing one in a million for 40 seconds, it sounds great on the radio, but like with an acoustic guitar, you just feel like an idiot. So I started reaching out to people like Valdi to be able to open up for them and see more of what they were doing. And I ended off working with a guy named Ron Hines, who was one of my idols from back home. He played with the Wonderful Graham Band when I was a child, and they were on TV. And when he was in his mid-60s and I was in my mid-40s, he reached out to me to do a tour. And we went on tour as a duo and did a bunch of large theaters together, sort of, 800 to 1,000 seat theaters, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. And he played acoustic guitar and I played bass and backed him up. And during the few years I worked with him, he taught me the art of narrative storytelling in a song. And he also taught me how to work with an audience. There's time, like some of my favorite artists that I go to see now, they'll talk for 6 or 8 minutes between songs. And I love that. But it's so different than, Thornley come out, there's no talking.
Yeah, less talk, more rock. That was the rules back in the day.
The first note hits before the lights come on, and the lights go off before the last note hits, and there's nothing in between except a wall of noise and insanity. And then all of a sudden, just an acoustic guitar and people staring at you, waiting for you to say something. It took me ages to start to cross that gap. And when I did, I found myself on the other side, working in the folk community quite strongly and playing shows like Merlefest in the States, where I played for 18,000 people, just me and an acoustic guitar, Jam in the Trees, the Philadelphia Folk Festival, stuff like that. I still can't get on the folk festivals in Canada because they all think I'm a rock guy. Aren't you the guy from Thornley? I'm like, yeah, we're a folk festival. I'm like,
but I got a big beard now and I wear a big hat.
No. They're still getting that. But America was pretty good, and I can work down there, which is nice. But yeah, it's been over a decade that I've been transitioning, so to speak. And I really feel like, at this point in time, with everything that's happened in the world in my life, I feel like I'm in a good place. I have a nice home studio where I make records for myself and I produce records for other people. I tour with the Watchmen. We do 5 or 8 shows a year. I make a record every year or 2. This last year I made 3. So I keep putting stuff out, and I have a weekly live stream that I love. That's now in its 15th month, and I haven't missed a Wednesday in 15 months. I do that, and that's been a great way to connect with audiences around the world. I don't know. I'm 52 years old. I've been playing music since I was 13. I had one job for 2 years working as a photo editor. Outside of that, I've never had another job. I don't know how I'm surviving. I really don't. This past weekend, I was doing my merch inventory and I got the new record out and I was going through all my old tour shirts and stuff. Just, you consolidate every few years. I'm like, okay, I got 6 of this one left and 10 of this one left and 3 of this one left. And I got this. I thought, I'm going to have a lemonade stand this weekend. So I actually set up a lemonade stand, Lemonade and Records, on the front of the street in front of my house. And I did it for 2 hours. And I sold lemonade, and I had vodka in the cooler for the adults that came. And I had all my shirts and hats and CDs and albums out. And, I was there I stood there for 2 hours in the sun. And at the end of it, I went in and I emptied my pockets and I had, $750. And I went,
all right.
I just got a fucking lemonade stand, which I haven't had since I was 6. And I sold records. Like it's crazy.
That's your second job now. You've been a photo editor and you've had a lemonade stand. Both so very successful runs.
Yeah, and they were both good. So yeah, so that's been kind of the story of my life. So much is just kind of try and make things happen and try and make them happen as best you can in order to do what I want to do, which is music.
Well, and talk to me about music for a second on sort of a broader scale, because you could have stayed with Thornley. You could have continued in the rock world. You felt like you wanted to go, but what was it about making things, creating stuff. What is that drive in you? You say you want to just keep making music, but you've been making music for 30 plus years, almost professionally for almost 30 years.
Yep.
What keeps you going? What motivates you?
I think at this point, like Bob Dylan has been an artist that I've been with since as long as I can remember. He's the one artist that's been consistent. And what I love about his music is every album that he's put out and the years that they've come out in my lifetime, like I can think back and think, oh, I was listening to Blood in the Tracks when this happened, or I was listening to this when this happened. And he's kind of documented his life through stories and songs. And now that I'm 50, I'm looking back and I'm realizing the Thornley and Watchman thing, because of the commerciality of those, they will have a certain life. And both of those bands will go down in the story of Canadian music, just because they had a life as commercial artists, and both bands were actually very talented and produced good music. As a solo artist, outside of that, doing what I do, you will never have that type of recognition. It's not a money game. It's a different thing. And I feel now at 52, when I look back through, I kind of feel like I need to keep just documenting as I go through. It's become so much a part of who I am and what I do. And it's not just the documenting of the music, it's the documenting of the story. My social media presence is kind of like my living story, if you will. And there's so many different varieties of it. I don't promote them all together, but I've got a blog, I've got a podcast, I've got there's Twitter, there's Instagram, all these different things, and things go in different ways. But I think there's a part of me that wants to, at the end of the day, when I'm no longer on this earth, for people to be able to look back and follow the story of Ken Tizzard. And I want it to be more than just a record or a song. I want it to be, there's kind of the story of my life laid out for people. Why I want to do that, I don't know. I mean, it could just be a product of, I've been doing it for a while and it seems like I should keep doing it. I don't particularly know the whys. It's what I love to do. I love to wake up every morning and, and take care of my wife and do what I need to do with her, take care of my kids, and then play guitar and play some music. And if the evening comes and there's a place to play in front of people, then yeah, I do that. It's kind of what I love doing. What
about your kids? Are they into music as well? Are they anybody gonna follow in Dad's footsteps? Because I know there's definitely some talent in singing. I know you've recruited them a little bit.
Yeah, they sing with me quite regularly. I mean, they started by the campfire when we were kids. When I first left Thornley, my wife was a teacher, and with the kids being in school, we decided that the best way for me to do summer tours is to buy an RV. So we bought an RV, and I'd pick them up the last day of school, and we'd go out to, Vancouver and then down through California one summer, and the next summer we'd go out to Newfoundland and then down through Boston and up through New York. And we toured for 7 years doing that. And during that time, my kids learned to sing because we do campfire stuff. As you probably know, there's something about siblings singing together that they breathe the same. They think there's something that happens that is unmatched with non sibling singers. So they have that knowledge. Plus, they can actually sing. And they enjoy doing it. So I've incorporated them, like when I played the Philly Folk Fest, they got up and did a couple songs with me. They've been on stages with me across the world, and now they're starting to record with me pretty regularly. And even the new record, All Together Now, which just came out a couple weeks ago, they sing on a bunch of tracks there as well. So they're very much into it. My youngest daughter, Cassidy, is in university at Queen's for engineering. Which is a massive, brainiac project type thing. I don't understand what she's even doing there, but she's real smart. But she loves music, but she wants to be an engineer. My oldest daughter, Caitlin, is actually just finished setting up her first recording studio. She knocked down a room in the house to take over for the studio, and she's just built a little studio, and she's going to make her first record now as well. She wants to sort of follow this for a little bit. So
amazing.
Yeah, it's great to have it in the family.
Yeah, you could be the modern day Von Trapps.
Exactly.
Just hopefully not being chased by Nazis,
Yes, exactly.
You've always been somebody that I know has always embraced technology, which is kind of hilarious that now you've rolled all the way back to a voice and, an acoustic guitar. Yeah. But I know you love your gear and your technology and your gadgets. Your social media you're using is basically your what the hell's the word I'm looking for? Archive. Yeah, like you use social media in a way that's a lot more active, I think, than a lot of other musicians and artists. You expose yourself, not literally, but figuratively on them, and you share lots of parts of your life on it.
Yeah.
What other sort of things are you using? I mean, you've got a studio. What are you using these days?
Well, I mean, the studio is pretty basic. I mean, it's basically my old bedroom. You can kind of see around here.
Right.
There's drums and guitar amps and lots of microphones and, the computer. The beautiful thing about it is, with this day and age, like when I started doing the broadcast, I hooked into a company called Switcher. And what Switcher allows you to use is any iOS device can attach to it. So, it's really, the technology is fascinating right now. So with an iPad, like for my Whiskey Wednesdays, the iPad broadcasts out to Restream, which sends it to all the platforms. But I use Switcher there. So I take my phone and whoever else has a phone, there's usually 6 phones here.
Right.
And each of those phones becomes its own camera. And I just set them around the room. And then using Switcher, my daughter just changes from camera to camera as we're playing live. So we basically have a TV studio in our house, which is crazy. But I don't work a job. I don't have hours. I don't know what day of the week it is, aside from I have to look at a calendar to, remind me that things like this, I have to do this 3:00 on a certain day.
Wednesday, I have my show. Make sure I'm there.
There's certain things like that. But for the most of it, my life revolves around kind of just wandering through the day. And what I've done with my social media, again, back with the Thornley thing, I got to see some of the ugly side of the record companies that I never wanted to be a part of. At one point I was fired from the band early on because somebody found out how old I was. And with it's just business, Ken, sorry, but you can't be the bass player anymore because you're too old. And I went, what do you mean? They don't want anybody above 24. And I went, are you fucking kidding me? So I got kicked out of the band for a month. And then a month later, Ian called me back and said, I've auditioned like a dozen bass players. I need you to be back in the band. But the condition is we're going to re-age you for the bio. And I'm like, what? It was like, yeah, so in the bios, your birth date will be changed. I said, okay. And then I started, people would say, so Ken, you're 26 now. I'm like, no, I'm 32. The bio says 26. Yeah, the bio's fucking lies. So I started getting in trouble for that stuff. And the entire, all of the mystique of rock and roll that started to come in that I always hated. When I decided to go solo, that was one of the first things that I said to myself is backstage is a place where I go if I need to. But after and before the shows, I want to meet the people that are there to see me. I want to talk to them. I want to put off a show and feel like I'm connecting with an audience. And that connection with the development of social media the way it has, I really started just being honest about stuff. And I mean, I'm not saying honest in that, I'm going to slam it. I've had lots of people say, who's the worst musician you've ever worked with and all this shit. I'm not going to get into that because that type of honesty doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah, we all know it's me.
Yeah.
It was me. I was terrible. That's why I stopped.
Yes, that's the B-side down on John's.
Yeah, you found me. You said, you're good enough to put on a bill. And then you're like, oh, I made a mistake. Get the fuck off my stage. And thank you for that.
Yes. Well, you're in a better place for it, believe me.
Yeah. Right.
So that sort of developed into this strangely transparent thing that I have online. I mean, like I said, even this weekend with the fucking lemonade stand. I mean, I don't know how many other Canadian musicians that have, had top 10 singles are posting on Facebook their home address and phone number to drop by. I don't really care. I mean, sometimes that attracts somebody who might be a little bit mentally imbalanced. And we all have those people around, but still you smile and you talk to them and you be friendly. I mean, they're still people. There are people that are just, even if there's not an issue, there are people that are just generally fucking annoying. But still they're there and they want to be a part of it. So, I always feel like there's never a reason to not include people. And the smoke and mirrors of rock and roll, I loved it for years. I mean, I loved hearing the rumors about Led Zeppelin, in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, and the rumors about the Smiths and all of these artists that you had no idea what was happening with. It was just the rumor mill or what you could read out of a magazine. Those days are done. And any sort of artistic expression that's still being packaged that way, I find has very little value for me. There's nothing of interest there for me. And that could be my age. It could be my experiences. I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying for me, it has little interest. And the stuff that I find I'm more engaged with is very authentic and honest. And that's, I can't even say I'm trying to provide that, because there's no trying to it. I mean, I wake up some days and I sit down and I just start typing. And, then my wife says, you just told everybody about something very personal. And yeah, sorry. And she's cool with it too. Like, my wife is very sick. She has MS, and she's had it for 7 years. A few years back, she had a stem cell bone marrow transplant that has left her pretty much in bed. She's been in bed now for 3 years. I have to, I'm her primary caregiver. So every time she needs a glass of water or brush her teeth or anything else she needs, I have to be there to help her. So touring has become very hard. Getting away. I mean, I don't even go out and buy groceries. We have somebody who does that for us. I don't leave the house because she needs me. She can't move. When the Watchmen have a show, or if there's a festival that I need to go do, it takes a lot of planning on my part to get in nursing and get family here to help and stuff. So over all of this, I find myself constantly adjusting to whatever's new and whatever has to happen to make my life continue. And I think that, the smoke and mirrors that a lot of rock acts are framed in, that doesn't work for me in my life. Even if I wanted to, it's like, I can't do that, because people have to know why I'm unavailable now. Mm-hmm. And that was, and once I started sharing stuff, especially about my wife, I discussed it with her. I said, I'm going to start telling people, because there was a lot of people saying, why aren't you doing this anymore? And why aren't you doing that? And I felt a need to tell them. And my wife said, that is your job. She said, you do it on stage. You talk about your depression and your OCD. You talk about your medication. And she said, you see how people react to that after, when they come up and give you a hug because you're talking about it. She said, that is who you are. She said, you need to embrace that more. And that will become part of what you're doing. And without any effort, there's a lot of work involved, but without any effort, that's kind of what's become my life, is just, I share, I share my music, I share my life, I share, when I set up the studio and started live streaming, there was another artist who'd been doing it for about a year prior to me and had a really nice setup. And when COVID hit and everybody was trying to figure out how to live stream, a lot of people had reached out to him, and he posted a video and he said, I've been doing this for a year and I went through a lot of trial and error and I spent thousands of dollars finding the right thing. And everybody's emailing me now saying, how do you do it? I'm not telling any. You got to go do it yourself the same way I did. And I kind of saw that video and I went, fuck that. And that night I went on and I said, everybody, here's what I'm using. And I walked through from the microphone to the interface to the thing that I used to get to the iPad and the iRig. And I explained everything. And that is the way that I feel. It's like, whatever I'm doing, if somebody's like, how did you do that? Well, absolutely. Here's how you do it. If they do it, that's going to empower them. And that's fantastic. And if they do it better than me, fine. I'm confident with what I'm doing. I'm not trying to beat anybody to the punch.
Well, I think a lot of that stuff goes hand in hand with the idea that you have embraced this storytelling music. So
Yes.
you're not just telling stories now when you're performing. You're telling them between your songs. You're telling them when you're off stage. You're telling them when you wake up in the morning and grab a cup of coffee. You're effectively an open book. And I mean, as you're saying, of course, there's certain things that you edit out. There's certain things we all edit out of our books. But
absolutely.
At the same time, if you found that the more you've let people in, the better the response, as opposed to kind of covering things up, faking your age, pretending like there's no drama going on, and sort of speaking around stuff, as opposed to sort of being more direct and more open about it, because that's a hell of a lot more relatable. Let's be fair.
Well, it's where I want to be. It's where I want to be, and it's where the people around me, the people that I have close to me, it's the way that I want them to be too. And like I said, at this point in my life, and it could be, passing the 50-year gap is a big thing. And it could be at 50, I just kind of look back and I kind of go, I don't want to do this, and this anymore, because those weren't actually fun. And they didn't actually bring me much positivity. And some of these things made great money, but the money's not worth it, and that's the other thing that I have a very weird relationship with money. I mean, I didn't grow up with any, and I've never really had any. I know people think that, musicians who make records for labels have a lot of money. The reality is, if I started a job at McDonald's when I was 20 and I still had it now, I would probably have made equal money. But I didn't, and I had a lot more fun than working at McDonald's. So that's what it's about for me. And I know that this podcast, a lot of it has to do with how do you make things, and then how do you make a living making things. And I've always said the hardest thing to do. I can write songs. I can sit down and I can write a song. I can sit down and I can write another song. I write all the time. But if I'm broke, and say a bill comes in, the roof needs to be repaired, and I'm like $12,000 down. I got to put it on my Visa. I'm like, okay, that's 12 grand on the Visa. I got to find a way to pay this down because the interest is fucking ridiculous. And then I sit down with a blank piece of paper and a pencil and my guitar, and I say, okay, I got to make some money. Not a fucking word will come out. Nothing. I can take a blank paper and a pencil and a guitar, and I can turn it into a song. But if my intention is to turn it into money, nothing comes out. It's the weirdest thing. And even when I started doing the live stream last year, I had a lot of people saying, why aren't you charging for this? Why aren't you charging? I said, well, everybody's locked down. We're all in a hard place. This is an hour for everybody to escape. I'm going to tell some songs, play some stories, take requests, whatever. It's very low key. And about 6 months into it, people said, okay, can you at least set up a PayPal link for donations? I've watched you 20 times now, and I'd like to send you a few bucks. Okay, fine. That sounds great. And I set that up. And that PayPal link gets put on the show every week. And I even say it's there. It's not necessary. It's appreciated, but don't feel any response. I've made more money through that method than if I had tried to do a ticketed event, I think. Right. I've had people, there are some people who watch every week and they send me $5. There are other people who watch once every 3 months and they send me $200. And there's a few people that have watched it a couple times and said, I've been following your music for so long. I'm signing up for a year. Here's $50 a month for the next year. It'll come out on the first of every month. These things to me then this has just been the last year this has been happening because I've been doing the online thing. It is overwhelming. And it also proves to me that there's a value to what I'm doing, and people respect that, and they're going to show it in the form of helping me put food on the table. Right. And I think that there's more of that down the road. And I think that this year of lockdown has taught people, I think the barter system and shopping locally, supporting stuff you really love that is authentic, spending a little bit more on some shoes that might sort of fit and be more comfortable than something that's just totally fashionable and was, churned out of some plant in China. I think that there's going to be an awakening to all that, and I think that's one of the silver linings of COVID. I know for me it has been. I'm just trying to find ways to continue doing what I'm doing, and without getting into the 5-year business plan that so many people work on. I have been there and I've done that. I'm not doing it anymore. I don't have a business plan. My business plan basically is to wake up in the morning, do what I need to do throughout the day, and to the point where when I lie in bed at night, I go, yeah, I think I got everything done. That is as far as my business plan goes. For whatever reason, it might be the 20 years of hard work that I put in with the Watchmen and Thorrnley that gave me enough of a presence to be able to maintain this. I really don't know. I don't know what other people are doing. I don't know when people are having their broadcasts, if they have 20,000 people watching to my, 80 or 100. I don't know. I also don't really care. It's kind of, life has gotten very insular for me. I started living in an isolation bubble a year before everybody else because of my wife. So I'm 2 years of isolation. I know everybody's just rounding out their first. I'm rounding out. I'm actually halfway through my third. Somebody does our grocery shopping for us. Somebody gets our mail and does my liquor store runs. So I don't need to leave the house because we've been so afraid of infection with my wife. Right. So it's been interesting, but somehow at the end, I did speak to my accountant today because tax day is today, of course, and he was rounding everything out. He said, "Man," he said, "that's one of the most dismal years you've had in a long time." I said, "Yeah," I said, "it is." He said, but look at the outgoing expenses. I said, "Look at my flights and hotels and gas. That's all at zero." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Strangely enough, you're about on par, even though it's been a horrible year." I said, "That's not bad." Yeah.
I'm kind of curious about the nature of inspiration for me. And I think for a lot of folks, at least we get it in our head that, that we need to go out and experience a lot of stuff in order to find inspiration. You've been at home for 2.5 years, give or take. You've had responsibilities that, I wouldn't wish on anybody over that time. Yet you're creating more music than you ever have before, and better music. And there's more honest music, more authentic music than you ever have. And I'm just curious, how are you finding inspiration when your entire day is spent between, 3, 4, 5 different rooms and, selling your merch and your
on the lemonade
your lemonade stand outside? Where does it come from?
In all honesty, my life has been really derailed since my wife got sick. The last 5 years have been incredibly tough. The last album of fully original material I put out was No Dark, No Light. And I wrote that when I was on tour with Ron, and I was being heavily influenced by Ron and other people. And I love that record. I think it's a really strong record. After that, once my wife was diagnosed with MS, there was a year of terror and therapy, for lack of a better word. When the doctor told us that she had MS, my immediate vision was life in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. And that scared me. So there was a year of figuring out what we were going to be coming up against. And the information over that year was even more terrifying as her health degraded. And I didn't get much writing. I wrote a lot that year, but it was all songs about how much I hated my wife being sick. So I shelved those away because that's not for public consumption, so to speak. And then Ron died. And I spent the better part of a year doing a tribute record for Ron, which was A Good Dog Is Lost. And part of that for me was also immersing myself in Ron's skin, as him being one of my favorite and closest songwriters. I wanted to immerse myself into the point where I could play the songs exactly like he did on the guitar and the vocal inflections, and then forgot it, and then learned how to play it the way that I would play it. And that process took about a year. And that was a process of interpretation, which is a creative experience for me. And then I made that record, and that record came out in December. And my wife was actually just getting a little bit better at that time. She was walking again and everything was good. And then she had another attack, which put her back into bed. And that was the one that led to the stem cell bone marrow transplant. So the Ron record came out. Then I had to move to Ottawa for a year with my wife while we had the transplant. And while I was there, I was having a hard time writing as well. And about 6 months into our stay there was a nice routine because she was quite tired at night, where I could leave the hospital at 6 or 7 and go to the apartment that we had rented for the year. And I had an empty apartment myself, and I had a small studio set up. So I wrote a record that year, which I've retitled a few times. And then we came home, and then COVID hit. So when COVID hit, I couldn't be with the band to put this record out. So I decided to follow along with being inspired by others. And that was where last year I came up with the idea to do All Together Now. So I chose 13 songs, and I put a Facebook post out saying, is anybody interested in recording some songs with me from home? This will be a little 21-day experiment to see what we can do. And the 21-day experiment turned into a year-long process with 45 musicians all across North America, all playing remotely. Nobody saw anybody. And that took a full year. And that record came out a couple weeks ago, and it's being met with amazing response, which is great. But now I have this other record in my back pocket, which I'm going to start recording soon. So inspiration for songwriting comes in many ways, but the songs you're not always writing songs for something. Writing for me, the act of writing and the act of inspiration is kind of like having a toolbox with 35 tools in it. And you don't have a job right now and you're waiting for a job. Do you just look at the toolbox, or do you take every tool out every day and work with it for 5 minutes? Then if you get a job, you're ready. And that's kind of how I see inspiration. I get up every day, I play a little bit. Sometimes it's a piece of crap. Most times it's a piece of crap. But then when I do have a moment of inspiration, and I mean some of like those lightning moments where a song arrives, I'm prepared for it and I can capture it properly. So creativity and inspiration are kind of two separate things, but they're also very much the same thing. It's a strange balance. You need to create all the time. To use a mining, metaphor. I mean, you can look at a hill and there's a diamond in it. mean, how much dirt do you need to remove to get to that diamond? I mean, that is kind of what songwriting is. So even though I'm inspired and writing songs all the time, I might only get 4 or 5 songs a year that I actually think are worthy of recording. The last few years have been great for me in immersing myself in the skin of others to do that. And I'm really looking forward. I mean, this next record that I'm working on, I mean, when I vision it in my head, I've got elements of the Pixies, Husker Du, George Jones, Ron Hines, and then some sort of folkier stuff over here. It's going to be a very eclectic record. But I think, again, a lot of that comes from what I've done the last few years of writing quietly in the corner while absorbing myself in other people's music. It's been a great learning experience and a really nice way to stay active in the brain.
So what kind of advice might you give somebody who's just starting out, who might want to get into the music biz or just music and not so much biz?
Well, if you're going to get in the music business, I would suggest looking at our friends like the cobblers. You know, there's not many men or women sitting at home in their house with shoe molds beating leather into shoe shapes anymore. The reason for that is you can go to Payless and buy your sneakers for $12. As you devalue a product, it becomes harder and harder to even talk about a marketplace. People ask, about the music of business nowadays. There is no music of business. The music business is dead. The music business is more than ever owned by a few major corporations that are pumping out, the Walmarts and the McDonald's of music. And that's fine, because that is what a lot of the mass consumption are looking for. Mm-hmm. The business of music otherwise is very much a labor of love, and what you have to do now as an artist is not just create the art, but you also have to use that artistic creativity to create ways to generate income. Spotify, you need a million plays for $2,000, but you also need 200,000 plays of 5 songs for $2,000. You can break that down further into smaller numbers. You can monetize simple things. You can do special events. You can reduce your expenses. There's a bar in Sarnia that I used to play at all the time, and they played pretty well. But then I think about it now, it's like, put 4 guys in a van with gear, drive 4 hours to Sarnia. Yeah, there's a meal and hotel included, and the pay is not bad, but it's 2 full days work for 5 or 6 people for not really a lot at the end of it. Mm-hmm. So getting into the music business, if you love music passionately enough that a career will evolve for you, it's going to happen. If you want to get into music because you think it's going to be cool, or you think it's going to make you famous, or any of those things, that's a good possibility too, because that means that you're willing to sacrifice all artistic things to be popular. And that's the type of stuff that people are looking for. They're not looking for bands who are set in their ways. They're looking for somebody who can sing and has a look and has an attitude that they can then package and market around it. If that's what you're looking to get into, great. What I've been telling students, maybe the last 20 years, I've done a lot of high school visits. You go in for talk about career day and stuff, and I go in and talk to kids about that. And what I tell them is that music is a beautiful gift. You can play music, and you can have music in your life as much or little as you want. And if you enjoy it, that does not mean it needs to be your career. You can get a job doing whatever it is, that doesn't make you leave home and doesn't make you travel the world. And you can make a living and get a good line of credit and buy a house and a car, like most of the people in the world, and still play music. And you can make music. You can make your own records. You can do all that. It's all there if you want to do it. And that's a wonderful thing too. But if you're getting into music as a career, it's a really bad choice. It's a really bad choice. You have to accept the fact that you probably won't own a house. You probably will never buy a new car. You will probably always be buying used beaters from friends. You will not eat at the restaurants that some of your other friends eat at. You will not have some of the clothes that your friends have, and you will not be able to shop they would do. However, the lifestyle that you will gain from immersing yourself in music completely, you could not buy if you were a millionaire. So, I I don't quite know if that answers the question, but for me, it kind of circles all the options. It depends what you want out of life. I love making music. I mean, most days go by, and at the end of the day, I look back and I think, I did this, and this today. And then I think, did I make any money today? And I go, no, I didn't make a dime today. I did not make a physical penny today. But tomorrow I might. I've grown accustomed to that. In my 30s, I fought with that a lot. Having young kids, the mortgage was high. My wife was working. I was constantly beating myself up for not making enough money. And not being able to provide for my family and not be able to do the things, my other friends were going on vacations and they were buying cars and stuff. And I was just like, I need to come to terms with the fact that is who I am. And I have. And there's a great peace that comes with that too. So there's a lot you've got to ask yourself if you're going to get into the music business. Well,
Ken, where can people find out more about you and your music?
Well, the website, kentizzard.com, has everything. There's a couple of new videos from the new album out. Twitter, Spotify, iTunes, Facebook, Instagram. I'm on all of it. Every Wednesday is the Whiskey Wednesday broadcast. That's a lot of fun. It's at 8:00 Eastern. You can catch it on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. It's me. I usually start pretty buzzed and I can continue getting buzzed. It's a really low-key thing. When COVID restrictions aren't in place, I can have the full band here, but otherwise it's just me. And that's a lot of fun, and it's a free thing. It's a great way to escape for an hour. I don't talk about COVID, and I don't talk about politics. I'll talk about everything else, and it's just a chance to escape from the world for an hour. So that's a lot of fun, too. And through any of those things, if you want to reach out to me, it all comes to me. There's no intermediary. There's nobody else. It's all me. So if you've got questions or if you're looking for something or you want to say something, just reach out and say it. That's kind of the way that all works.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing how you make a living.
It's been amazing, Robbie. Thank you.
Subscribe to Making a Living Show on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, and pretty much anywhere else you get your podcasts. For more on the show, visit makingalivingshow.com and follow along on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Making a Living Show is produced by Next Exit Media and hosted by me, Roby Levy. Thanks for listening.